Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku led a resistance in a dystopian future city? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain in Ethelberg didn't just fall, it scoured. It carried the acidic tang of industrial runoff from the gleaming spires of the registered sector, sluicing down into the labyrinthine underbelly of the city where the suppressed huddled. It hissed against the flickering neon of black market textiles and slicked the grimy Durasteel walkways with a perpetual sheen of grime. Tonight, it fell with a particular vengeance, each drop a cold needle against the skin. In the shadowed maw of Alloy Alley, a district known for its chopped shops and information brokers, the rain was the only thing offering any cover. A man, his face a mask of desperate terror, held his wife and daughter close, pressing them against the rust-eaten wall of a defunct power conduit. The little girl, no older than 7, was whimpering, her small hands clutching the cold, blue ring around her neck. The ring, the quirk-suppressing collar, was the symbol of their age. A mandatory accessory for every citizen in the suppressed class, a constant reminder of their place. Hers, however, was no longer glowing with the steady, placid cerulean of compliance. It was flashing a frantic, aggressive crimson. Non-compliance registered, Citizen H4881, a synthesized voice crackled, emanating from the 3 figures blocking the alley's exit. They were wardens, the enforcers of the Commission for Public Order. Their pristine white and blue armor was impervious to the rain, their faceless helmets reflecting the lurid red flashes from the child's collar. It was a malfunction. A power surge, I swear. The father pleaded, his voice thin against the downpour. She can't control it. Please, just let us get it reset. The lead warden, designated by the 7 on his shoulder plate, took a heavy step forward. His shock baton hummed with latent energy. The Ethelberg Accords are absolute. Unregistered quirk activation is a Class A offense. The asset must be contained. Asset. The word was cold, clinical. It stripped his daughter, Lena, of her name, her humanity. The mother clutched her child tighter. She's not an asset. She's a little girl. Warden 7 ignored her. His visor glowed as he analyzed the energy readings. Teleportation. High yield. Unstable. Lethal force is authorized. The father's blood ran cold. He pushed his family behind him, raising his hands in a useless gesture of surrender. No, please. Don't. The wardens raised their weapons. The air crackled with imminent violence. The rain seemed to fall harder, a drumbeat for a tragedy. And then, the lights in the alley went out, not just the flickering sign above them, but the halo lamps on the wardens' helmets, the charge indicators on their batons, even the crimson flashing from the girl's collar. The alley was plunged into an abyssal darkness, the only sound the drumming rain and the confused grunts of the wardens. A new sound joined the cacophony. The sharp, whip crack of something cutting through the air, followed by the wet thud of a body hitting the ground. A second followed. Contact! Unknown hostile! Warden 7 barked, activating his thermal optics. The visor flickered to life, painting the world in shifting hues of orange and blue. He saw one of his men slumped against the wall, unconscious. The other was dangling 5 feet off the ground, suspended by a thick, black tendril that seemed to have erupted from the shadows above. Before he could process the image, a flicker of impossible green lightning illuminated the alley for a nanosecond. In that flash, he saw a figure, hooded and clad in dark, tactical gear that bore the scars of 100 battles. Then, the green was gone, and something slammed into his chest with the force of a freight train. He felt his ribs crack as he was thrown back, his armor groaning in protest. He hit the opposite wall and slid to the ground, his system screaming error messages into his ears before darkness claimed him. Silence returned, broken only by the rain and the family's ragged breaths. A figure detached itself from the deeper shadows. He was tall, his form lean but corded with muscle visible even through the worn fabric of his gear. A dark green hood obscured his face, casting it in perpetual twilight. As he moved into the faint, ambient glow from the main thoroughfare, the family saw the faint, scarred tracery of emerald light pulse beneath the skin of his arms before fading. He knelt, not before the parents, but before the little girl. He moved with a quiet, practiced gentleness that seemed at odds with the brutal efficiency of his attack. He raised a gloved hand, and the girl flinched. "It's okay," a voice rumbled, low and rough, like stones grinding together. It was a voice that hadn't been used for pleasantries in a long time. "I'm not going to hurt you." He reached for her collar. The father tensed, but the man's movements were precise. He produced a small, cylindrical tool and pressed it against the collar's locking mechanism. There was a soft hiss, a click, and the device fell away into his hand. The girl took a shuddering gasp, her first breath in years unburdened by the suppressor field. "She needs this," the hooded man said, his voice still low. He produced another collar from a pouch on his belt. It looked identical, but its light was a soft, steady white. "It's a spoofer. It will emit the standard compliance signature. The Commission won't be able to track her quirk's energy readings with this on." He carefully fastened the new collar around her neck. The white light shifted, perfectly mimicking the standard issue cerulean blue. The father finally found his voice. Who are you?" The hooded figure rose, his attention already scanning the rooftops, listening for the inevitable approach of reinforcements. The people of the underbelly traded stories about him in hushed whispers. They called him a ghost, a myth, a vengeful spirit born from the ashes of the old world. "They call me Vestige," he said, the name a hollow echo of a forgotten legacy. He pressed a small data chip into the father's hand. "This has coordinates to a safe house in the lower levels. Go now. Don't stop. They will get you out of the city." He turned to leave, a wraith ready to melt back into the rain-soaked darkness. "Thank you," the mother whispered, her voice choked with tears. "You saved her. You saved us." For a moment, the figure paused, his back to them. The shoulders of his worn jacket seemed to carry an impossible weight. A brief, intrusive memory flashed behind his eyes, other faces, other screams he hadn't been fast enough to answer, a world of friends he had failed to save. The weight settled heavier. "Get your daughter to safety," he repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. "That's all the thanks I need." And then he was gone, scaling the wall with inhuman speed, swallowed by the oppressive dark of Ethelberg. Izuku Midoriya, the man once known as Deku, moved through the city like a phantom. He kept to the rooftops and the forgotten maintenance tunnels, a network of arteries unseen by the ever-watchful eye of the Commission. 10 years. It had been 10 years since the Great Purge, when the newly formed Commission for Public Order, born from the ashes of the Hero Public Safety Commission, had declared the Age of Heroes over. Fear, they had called it. A necessary measure. The Paranormal Liberation War had shown the world the destructive potential of quirks. The chaos, the death, it had terrified the populace into submission. And so, the Commission had offered them a solution: order. An iron-fisted, absolute order. The Ethelberg Accords were signed, and the collars were locked into place. Society was neatly bisected. The registered, those with quirks deemed useful to the state, lived in sterile, privileged spires, their collars glowing a proud gold. And the suppressed, the vast majority, lived in the sprawling, decaying slums below, their collars a constant, subservient blue. Izuku leaped across a chasm between two dilapidated tenement buildings, the kinetic energy stored in his legs from Fa gene releasing in a silent, controlled burst. He landed without a sound, his danger sense a low thrum at the base of his skull, a constant companion that warned him of drone patrols and hidden cameras. He was a ghost haunted by 8 others, the vestiges of one for all his silent counsel. He rarely used the awesome power of the core quirk anymore. A 100% smash would bring the whole city down on him. Instead, he had mastered the others, turning them into tools of a subtle, silent war. Black Whip for non-lethal capture and traversal. Fa Gene for speed. Smokescreen for misdirection. Danger Sense for survival. Float for access. The gifts of his predecessors had become the arsenal of a guerrilla fighter. He was 28 years old, but he felt ancient. The bright, hopeful boy who had inherited All Might's legacy had been burned away in the fires of failure and loss, leaving behind this grim, pragmatic strategist. Vestige. A remnant of a bygone era. His destination was a decommissioned subway station, deep in the oldest part of the city, a place the Commission's shiny new infrastructure had bypassed and forgotten. He slipped through a grate, dropping into the damp, echoing darkness. The air tasted of stale water, ozone, and decay. The peeling posters on the wall were phantoms from another time, advertising products and heroes that no longer existed. One, tattered and faded, showed the smiling face of All Might. Izuku didn't look at it. He couldn't. He followed the curve of the tunnel until he saw a faint light ahead, the glow of a portable workstation. A figure was hunched over it, her back to him. She wore practical cargo pants and a worn leather jacket, her brown hair cut into a short, no-nonsense bob. "You're late," she said without turning around. "Ran into some wardens giving a family a hard time," Izuku replied, his voice returning to a slightly more natural, though still gravelly, tone as he pulled back his hood. His face was sharper than it had once been, his jaw set in a permanent line of tension. A thin scar cut through his right eyebrow, and his green eyes, once so full of life, now held a deep, weary sorrow. His freckles were the only boyish thing left about him. Achiko Uraraka turned in her swivel chair. Her face, too, was changed by the years. The round softness was gone, replaced by the sharp angles of someone who had missed too many meals and slept too few hours. But her eyes, though tired, still held a spark of the fierce determination he had always known. She was the heart of their fledgling resistance, the one who managed their network, their resources, and their dwindling hope. "The intel you gave me was garbage, Achiko," he said, leaning against the damp tiled wall. "That was an ambush waiting to happen. They had a whole squad waiting 2 blocks over." Achiko's expression tightened. She swiped a hand across her terminal, bringing up a schematic of the area. "Impossible. I scrubbed the comm chatter myself. It was clean. No mention of an advanced patrol." She looked up at him, her brow furrowed. "Izuku, this is the 3rd time in 2 months our intel has been compromised. The wardens were waiting for you at the docks last month, and they knew our escape route from the data heist." Izuku's jaw clenched. They both knew what it meant, the ugly truth they had been avoiding. "We have a leak." "Not just a leak," she corrected, her voice low and serious. "A traitor. Someone high up. Someone who knows our protocols." The thought sent a chill colder than the tunnel air down Izuku's spine. Their group, the Embers, was small. It was built on a foundation of desperate, absolute trust. A crack in that foundation could bring the whole thing crashing down. He pushed the thought aside. They would deal with it. They had to. "Everyone accounted for?" he asked. "Kaminari is trying to decrypt the new Warden Patrol ciphers. Jiro is mapping patrol drone blind spots near the industrial sector," Achiko reported. "We're all stretched thin. This leak, it's making everyone jumpy." She looked him over, her gaze softening slightly. "You look like hell. Did you get hit?" "Just bruised," he lied. He could feel a broken rib protesting with every breath. He'd had worse. Achiko didn't look convinced but let it go. She knew pushing him was pointless. Instead, her expression shifted, a new kind of tension entering her eyes. "There's something else. It came in about an hour ago. I was about to scrub it from the network when I saw the encryption signature." She turned back to her terminal and tapped a few keys. A string of corrupted data filled the screen, a mess of static and garbled code. But within it, a single, repeating line of text pulsed faintly. "CQ, CQ, plus Ultra, Beacon 1A, CQ." Izuku froze. His blood turned to ice in his veins. That wasn't just code. It was a memory. A ghost. "It's an old UA high emergency frequency," Achiko said, her voice barely a whisper. "First-year heroics training stuff. No one has used this in over a decade. The signal is weak, bouncing off half the relays in the dead zone, but the authentication code it's real, Izuku, plus Ultra. Beacon 1A. A distress call from their old class. A class that was scattered, captured, or dead. For 10 years, he had believed he was one of the few who had escaped the purge. The thought that someone else, one of them, might still be out there, calling for help, it was a hope so dangerous it felt like a weapon pointed at his own heart. "Where is it coming from?" he asked, his voice strained. Achiko zoomed in on a map of Ethelberg, the signal's estimated origin point blinking in a sector that had been cordoned off and left to rot years ago. An area of the old city that was once the pinnacle of Hero's society. The epicenter of the signal, she said, her eyes meeting his, wide with disbelief and trepidation. Is what's left of Muzidafu. Izuku stared at the blinking light on the map, and for the first time in a long time, the weary ghost of vestige receded, and the determined heart of Izuku Midoriya began to beat a little faster. A call for help. A code from their past. It's a trap, Achiko said immediately, her pragmatism overriding the sudden wave of nostalgia. It has to be. The Commission knows who you are, who we are. They're using our past against us, trying to draw you out. Maybe, Izuku conceded, his gaze fixed on the screen. He saw the coordinates, but his mind saw something else, a sprawling campus, green lawns, and the towering glass buildings of his old school. He saw the faces of his friends, smiling and full of promise, before the world had broken them. He knew Achiko was right. Logically, it was a trap. The leak in their own network made it almost a certainty. Responding was reckless, foolish. It was the kind of move the old Deku would have made, driven by heart instead of head. But as he stared at the words Plus Ultra pulsing on the screen, a fragile, unfamiliar feeling began to bloom in the barren wasteland of his chest. It was a flicker of the fire he thought had been extinguished forever. Or maybe, Izuku said, his voice quiet but laced with a resolve that Achiko hadn't heard in years, it's one of ours. And they need our help. The ghost of Muzidafu was calling. And he knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that he had to answer. The entrance to their sanctuary was as unassuming as the decay surrounding it. A rusted maintenance hatch in the floor of the abandoned subway tunnel, hidden beneath a loose pile of rubble and grime that would look, to any passing patrol, like just another piece of urban collapse. Achiko keyed a sequence into a concealed keypad, and the hatch hissed open with a puff of warm, sulfur-tinged air. The contrast was immediate and profound. The cold, damp misery of the tunnel gave way to a dry, enveloping warmth that seemed to seep into their bones. They descended a narrow, spiraling staircase of repurposed rebar, the darkness giving way to the soft, ambient glow of a hidden world. This was the hearth. Carved out of a nexus of old geothermal vents deep beneath the city, it was a cavernous space where nature's raw power met humanity's desperate ingenuity. The rough-hewn rock walls, streaked with mineral deposits, were reinforced with scavenged durasteel plates and scaffolding. Thick, insulated cables snaked across the ceiling like metallic vines, channeling geothermal energy to power their existence. The air hummed with the constant, low thrum of machinery, the hiss of steam from pressure regulators, and the faint, ever-present scent of ozone and hot metal. It was a makeshift home, a fortress built from scraps, but it was theirs. Small, partitioned living quarters were tucked into alcoves in the rock. A hydroponics bay, bathed in a soft purple light, provided their meager but essential food supply. At its center, the heart of the operation, was the command hub, a chaotic cluster of desks, monitors, and servers, all wired into the cavern's main power conduit. Two figures were already there, islands of intense focus in the sprawling space. The first was a man whose frantic energy seemed to generate its own electrical field. Genki Kaminari was hunched over a bank of monitors, his fingers a blur across 3 different keyboards. Empty cans of high-caffeine Synthstim formed a small silver mountain by his desk. The playful goofball who once short-circuited his own brain was gone, replaced by a man running on pure nervous energy, and the hum of the machines he commanded. A stray spark occasionally danced at his fingertips, a nervous tick born from years of suppressing his quirk, while simultaneously living inside the digital world. He was their digital ghost, their lifeline. Signals dirty, he muttered without looking up as they approached. Commission is running a new encryption sweep every 20 minutes. It's like they're trying to catch a whisper in a hurricane. I can barely keep our comms cloaked. Anything we can use? Achiko asked, her voice shifting into the role of second in command. Maybe. Found a recursive loop in their warden dispatch algorithm. Could be a backdoor if I can crack the source key, he said, finally glancing up. His eyes were bloodshot, pupils dilated from staring at code for 18 hours straight. What did you find out there, boss? He asked, his gaze shifting to Izuku. Before Izuku could answer, the second figure spoke, her voice calm and melodic, a stark contrast to Kaminari's jittery cadence. Warden patrol patterns in the lower sectors have changed, Kyokujiro said. She sat at a much neater workstation, surrounded by sensitive audio equipment. A pair of high-fidelity headphones rested around her neck, her iconic earphone jacks occasionally twitching, tasting the ambient vibrations in the air. They're using new APC models. Quieter engine hum, different acoustic signature. They're adapting. Jiro was their ears. Her quirk, once used for rock music and pinpointing enemy locations in a fight, had been refined into a tool of unparalleled espionage. She could listen to the city's heartbeat, the rumble of the Mack trains, the thrum of the power grid, the subtle vibrations of drone patrols, and from that symphony of noise, she could map their world and find the silences where they could move unseen. Izuku nodded, absorbing the information. They were waiting for us in Alloy Alley. Almost. That got both their attention. Kaminari swiveled in his chair, his frantic typing ceasing. Jiro turned fully, her dark eyes sharp and analytical. The leak, Kaminari breathed, a new layer of paranoia creeping into his voice. It's real, Achiko confirmed, her expression grim. She moved to the central holodeble, her fingers dancing across its surface. And it's not the worst news tonight. She activated the display, and the garbled data from the distress signal filled the air above the table, the line of text pulsing like a faint, dying heartbeat. CQ, plus Ultra, Beacon 1A, CQ. Kaminari leaned in, his eyes scanning the code. Whoa. That's ancient. Pre-Accord military encryption. Barely a signal, piggybacking on a commercial satellite relay. Where did you pull this from? It found us, Izuku said, his voice low. Jiro stood and walked over, her gaze narrowed on the signal's waveform, displayed on a secondary screen. The signal degradation is immense. It's traveled a long way, or it's being broadcast from a very low-power source. It's also bouncing like crazy. The origin point is a mess. I triangulated it, Achiko said, bringing up the map of Ethelberg. The single red dot blinked ominously. As best I could, silence fell over the command hub. Kaminari stared, his mouth slightly agape. Jiro's usual stoicism cracked, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. The name of the sector was unspoken, but it hung in the air, thick with ghosts. Musudafu. No, Kaminari said flatly, shaking his head. No way. That's a trap. It's a honeypot, a big, glowing come-and-get-me sign for vestige. He pointed a trembling finger at the code. The encryption is too perfect. It's like someone read a history book on UA's field tactics and built a signal specifically designed to bait one of us. To bait you, he finished, looking at Izuku. He's right, Jiro added, her voice regaining its steady composure. That entire sector is a surveillance dead zone. No active sensors, no regular patrols. The Commission just walled it off and left it to rot. Why? Because anyone who goes in doesn't come out. It's the perfect place for an ambush. We'd be going in blind and deaf. And we have a traitor in our network, Achiko stated, crossing her arms. She stood between Izuku and the holodeble, a physical barrier between him and the reckless hope the signal represented. We can't trust any intelligence that just falls into our laps. Especially not this. It's a direct appeal to your past, Izuku. It's emotionally compromised. They know you won't be able to ignore it. Everything they said was logical. Sensible. It was the smart play, the strategist's choice. Izuku knew it. He could see the checkmate board they were describing. But he wasn't looking at the board, he was listening to the echo. Plus Ultra. It wasn't just a motto, it was a promise. A bond forged in blood, sweat, and the shared dream of a better world. It's a risk, Izuku said, his voice a low rumble. But if there is even a 1 in a million chance that someone from our class is alive, trapped in there and calling for help. He trailed off, the unspoken conclusion hanging in the air. Then we owe it to them to find out, Achiko finished for him, her voice laced with a deep, weary frustration. I know what you're thinking, but how many times can we risk the few people we have left on a 1 in a million chance? We've lost good people that way, Izuku. We lost Mashireo. We lost Toru. The name struck him like physical blows. He saw their faces, remembered their trust in him, and his failure to protect them. The weight on his shoulders grew heavier. But it didn't change his mind. It only hardened his resolve. This is different, he insisted. Why? Achiko challenged, her voice rising. Because it's someone from 1A? Because they're more important than the others who have died for this cause? The accusation stung, but he knew it came from a place of fear for him, for all of them. No. It's different because if the Commission wanted to trap me, they have 100 better ways to do it. Ways that don't involve a dead frequency and a code only a handful of people in the world would even recognize. This is either real, or it's a trap so specific, so personal, that it tells us something new about our enemy. Either way, we can't ignore it. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the war between her duty to the Embers and her loyalty to him. He could see her starting to buckle, and it was that flicker of yielding that sent his mind tumbling back into the abyss. Back to the day when yielding had cost him everything. The memory was brief, sharp, and visceral. Not a gentle recollection, but a violent psychic wound that never fully closed. The sky over a burning Kamino ward was the color of a poisoned orange, thick with black smoke that choked the lungs and stung the eyes. The Great Purge wasn't a single battle. It was a systematic execution. The newly empowered Commission wardens, supported by legions of automated attack drones, moved with terrifying efficiency. He was 19. He was still learning to control the full deluge of One for All. He had been fighting for 3 days straight, running on nothing but desperation and the frantic need to get his friends, his fellow heroes, to safety. He saw Kirishima, his unbreakable form starting to crack under a relentless barrage of anti-quirk energy blasts. He was shielding a group of civilians, his grin a bloody grimace of defiance. Go, Midoriya! Get them out of here! He had roared, the sound barely audible over the cacophony of destruction. Izuku had turned, his body screaming in protest, Black Whip lashing out to pull a family from the path of a collapsing building. But when he turned back, Kirishima was gone, buried under a mountain of rubble and swarmed by wardens. He remembered the feeling of raw, untamed power surging through him, a hurricane of grief and rage. He had tried to unleash it, to smash his way back to his friend, but a hand had grabbed his arm. It was Shoto, his face half covered in blood, his breathing ragged. We can't, Izuku! It's over! We have to run! He had hesitated for a fatal second, torn between the hero's instinct to save and the survivor's need to flee. In that second, a net of energy enveloped Shoto from behind. He cried out, his fire and eyes sputtering and dying as the suppressor field took hold. Izuku saw the wardens dragging him away, saw the look of betrayal and despair in his friend's eyes. He had lunged, but it was Achiko who had saved him then, slapping her hand on his back, making him weightless, and pulling him away as the entire street exploded. They had escaped. Barely. He had survived. But he had left them behind. All of them. That was the choice he had made. The memory was his penance, the ghost that whispered in his ear every single day, you ran. You failed them. Izuku blinked, the humid air of the hearth chasing away the scent of smoke and ash. He was back in the command hub, the concerned faces of his team staring at him. He realized his fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. I'm not leaving anyone behind again, he said, his voice scraped raw with an emotion he hadn't let himself show in years. Not if there's a chance. I'm going. The finality in his tone silenced all further argument. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was an order born from a decade of guilt. Achiko held his gaze for a long moment, and then her shoulders slumped in resignation. The fight went out of her, replaced by a weary resolve. Okay, she said softly. Okay, Izuku, but you're not going in blind. And you're not going alone. Her eyes flicked to Jiro. Kyoka. I want a full acoustic map of the sector. Every blind spot, every structural weakness, every rat that scurries in those ruins. I want to know the sound of the wind blowing through those buildings before you let him take a single step inside. Jiro nodded, her expression all business. Already on it. Give me an hour. Achiko then turned to Kaminari. Denki. I need a ghost. A big one. I want you to create a signal that looks like a major quirk activation on the other side of the city. Something that will draw every warden patrol car within 10 clicks. Make it loud, make it messy, and make it look real. Kaminari cracked his knuckles, a spark of his old, confident energy returning. A digital phantom bomb? I can do that. I'll need to splice together some old energy signatures from the Commission's own archives. Use their own ghost stories against them. It'll be a masterpiece. Then get to it, Achiko commanded. Her focus returned to Izuku. You have 1 hour to get ready. Go. There was a quiet, profound trust in the room. They didn't agree with his decision, but they trusted him. They would move heaven and earth to give him the best possible chance to survive his own stubborn heart. It was a loyalty forged in the fires he so vividly remembered, and it was the only thing that had kept him going for 10 long years. Izuku gave a single, grateful nod and turned, heading towards his small, Spartan alcove. His preparation was a ritual, a series of methodical movements that quieted the storm in his mind. He stripped off his outer gear, checking every seam and buckle. He meticulously cleaned the focusing lenses on his visor and calibrated the air filters in his rebreather. His primary support items were his armored gauntlets and iron-soled boots, relics from his past he had maintained and modified over the years. He polished the worn metal, his mind going blessedly blank as he focused on the simple, physical task. He laid out his limited arsenal on his cot. A handful of smoke pellets. A high-tensile wire launcher. 2 combat knives. He wasn't a hero going on patrol. He was an insurgent preparing for an infiltration. He pulled a fresh energy pack for his suit's systems, the click as it seated into place echoing in the small space. He ran a diagnostic, watching the green lights flicker to life on his forearm display. Power at 100%. Life signs nominal. He was ready. As he was pulling on his gauntlets, Achiko appeared at the entrance to his alcove, holding 2 ration bars and a canteen of water. She didn't say anything, just handed them to him. Thanks, he said, forcing himself to take a bite from one of the chalky, nutrient-dense bars. Jiro will go with you, she said. It wasn't a suggestion. Her ears are better than your danger sense for detecting traps and ambushes. You'll stick to the route she's mapping and you'll pull out the second she says so. No arguments. Okay, he agreed. She hesitated, her gaze softening. Izuku, whatever we find there, be ready for it. Hope is a dangerous thing in this city. I know, he said, his voice quiet. He knew she was right. But a life without any hope at all was just a slower way of dying. He had been doing that for 10 years. For the first time, he felt a flicker of something else. He had to know if it was real. An hour later they were ready. Kaminari gave a thumbs up from his station. Ghost signal is primed and ready. The moment you cross into the Muzidafu buffer zone, I'll light the fuse. You'll have a 30-minute window, max, before their analysts realize it's a spoof. Jiro approached, holding a small earpiece. I've mapped a subterranean route. Old sewer lines and utility tunnels. It'll get you to the edge of the campus with minimal surface exposure. This is tuned to my biosignature. If we get separated, I can send out a low-frequency pulse you can home in on. Izuku took the earpiece and fitted it into his ear. He looked at Jiro, seeing the quiet competence in her eyes. Thank you, Kyoka? She just nodded. Let's go hunt a ghost. They left the hearth the same way they came, ascending the spiral stairs into the cold, damp darkness of the subway. The city above was a sleeping beast, its glowing towers like the eyes of a predator. Izuku and Jiro moved with a practiced synchronicity, shadows detaching from shadows. They slipped through sewer grates and traversed darkened alleyways, Jiro occasionally holding up a hand, her head cocked as she listened to something Izuku couldn't hear, the hum of a hidden power line, the vibration of a distant patrol. The further they moved into the quarantine zone, the more the city's oppressive order decayed. The neat grid of streets gave way to rubble-choked roads. The gleaming skyscrapers were replaced by the skeletal remains of buildings, their sides ripped open, exposing floors like ribs on a carcass. Nature was reclaiming the land with a savage tenacity. Ivy choked the life out of concrete, and mutated weeds grew thick in the cracks of the pavement. There were no surveillance drones here. No warden patrols. No glowing collars. There was nothing. Just an unnerving, profound silence. We're here, Jiro whispered, her voice a ghost in his ear. Kaminari lighted up. Showtime, Kaminari's voice crackled back. Far across the city, A cascade of false energy readings flooded the Commission's network, an invisible explosion of data designed to draw the wolves away from their door. They emerged from a collapsed sewer main into what was once a bustling town square. Now, it was a graveyard of rusted vehicles and faded storefronts. And there, at the end of the square, perched on a hill overlooking the devastation, was their destination. Izuku's breath hitched. Even as a ruin, it was unmistakable. The iconic, H-shaped main building stood like a tombstone against the perpetually gray sky. One of the towers had collapsed, its glassless windows like hollow eye sockets. The once pristine grounds were a jungle of overgrown weeds and fallen trees. The grand entrance arch was still there, but the famous motto etched above it, Plus Ultra, was fractured and barely legible. Yue Hai. The source of the distress signal wasn't just in Muzidafu. It was coming from the heart of their dead dream. The place where it all began. Achiko's warning echoed in his mind. Hope is a dangerous thing. Staring at the skeletal remains of his old school, a place of so many cherished memories now twisted into a monument of their failure, Izuku felt a cold dread mix with the desperate flicker of hope in his chest. Kaminari was right. This wasn't a trap. It was a tomb. And it was beckoning them inside. The silence of the Muzidafu dead zone was a living thing. It pressed in on them, a heavy blanket woven from years of neglect and forgotten tragedy. As Izuku and Jiro moved through the skeletal remains of the Yue High grounds, every crunch of debris under their boots sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. The campus was a ghost story written in concrete and steel. The path from the main gate, where they had once walked with dreams in their hearts, was now a fractured mess of stone and earth, reclaimed by a savage, mutated form of ivy. The vast training grounds, the Gamma and Beta gymnasiums, were hulking, dark shapes in the distance, their windows like 1,000 vacant eyes staring into nothing. Shattered glass littered the ground like fallen stars, glittering faintly in the perpetual twilight of Ethelberg's smog-choked sky. Anything? Izuku's voice was a low whisper in their shared comms link. Nothing, Jiro breathed back, her head tilted, one of her earphone jacks trailing along the moss-covered wall of the main building. No electrical hum. No vibrations. No comms chatter. It's dead. The only sound is the wind whistling through the cracks. She paused. It feels wrong. The silence is too perfect. Izuku's danger sense agreed. It wasn't the sharp, stabbing premonition of an immediate threat, but a low, constant thrum at the base of his skull, an ambient wrongness that had been growing since they'd entered the sector. This place wasn't just abandoned, it felt preserved in its state of decay, a fly trapped in amber. The distress signal was stronger here, a faint, rhythmic pulse that their gear could now easily detect. It led them towards the main building, its H-shaped structure a monument to a fallen age. They slipped through a shattered glass doorway, entering the cavernous main hall. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of gray light piercing the grime-caked skylights. Tattered banners bearing the school's crest hung like forgotten battle standards. A ghost of laughter seemed to echo in the empty space, a memory of 1,000 students bustling through these halls. Izuku pushed it away. He couldn't afford to remember them as they were. Not here. Not now. The signal is coming from upstairs, Jiro murmured, pointing towards the grand staircase. Ground floor is clear. Acoustically, at least. They ascended the stairs, their movements synchronized and silent. Izuku took the lead, his body coiled with tension. Black Whip was a live wire under his skin, ready to lash out. The signal grew stronger with every step, leading them down a familiar corridor. He recognized it instantly. The first-year classrooms. It was coming from the end of the hall. From the open doorway of Classroom 1A, a single, small broadcasting unit sat on what was once Mr. Aizawa's desk. It was a simple, low-powered device, its red light blinking in time with the signal. The room was otherwise empty, a time capsule of their past. Desks were overturned, textbooks lay swollen and mildewed on the floor, and a large crack spiderwebbed across the blackboard. Izuku's danger sense, which had been a dull hum, suddenly went silent. The absence of the warning was more alarming than its presence. It was the deep breath before the plunge. It's just the broadcaster, Jiro said, her jacks extending to scan the device from a safe distance. No explosives, no secondary transmitters. It's just a beacon. That's what's wrong, Izuku whispered, his eyes scanning the room, the hallway, every shadow. It's too simple. He took a half step towards the doorway, and that's when the trap sprang. It wasn't an explosion. It was a sound, a high-frequency snap hiss that came from all around them. From the ceiling, from the floor, from the walls of the corridor, panels slid open, and from them emerged dozens of projector units. A lattice of brilliant blue energy erupted, forming a containment field that boxed them in the hallway. It was an inescapable cage of light. Simultaneously, the ruins of Ue High blazed with an unnatural, blinding glare. High-intensity searchlights mounted on the rooftop and surrounding buildings snapped on, incinerating the shadows and turning their world into a stark diorama of white light and black relief. Ambush! Jiro yelled, her hands flying to her ears as a disorienting sonic pulse washed over them. From both ends of the corridor, heavy, armored figures descended from the ceiling on grav lifts, their movements perfectly synchronized. Elite wardens. 6 of them. Their white and blue armor was sleeker, more advanced than the street-level enforcers. They carried high-energy pulse rifles, all aimed directly at Izuku. Vestige, a synthesized voice boomed from the campus-wide PA system, a voice that was cold, dispassionate, and utterly devoid of life. You are in violation of the Ethelberg Accords, Section 1 through 12. Power down your systems. Surrender for processing. Izuku and Jiro were back-to-back, cornered. Izuku's mind raced, analyzing angles, structural weaknesses, the power conduits for the projectors. There was no easy way out. Then, a new figure descended into the center of the hall below, landing with a soft, mechanically dampened thud. This warden was different. His armor was a more brilliant, almost pearlescent white, trimmed in a regal, commanding blue. He moved with a stiff, formal grace that was unnervingly familiar. State-of-the-art armor encased his legs, humming with a barely contained power that distorted the air around them. He radiated an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. This was their leader, the Warden General. Your tactics are predictable, Midoriya, the figure said, his voice amplified by his helmet, but losing its synthesized edge. It was deeper, more human, and it struck a chord of memory so deep within Izuku it felt like a physical blow. You were always driven by sentiment. It was your greatest strength as a hero. It is your most exploitable weakness as an insurgent. Izuku stared, his heart hammering against his ribs. That cadence. That precise, formal diction. It couldn't be. The Warden General reached up with a white gauntlet hand and disengaged the seals on his helmet. With a soft hiss of depressurization, he lifted it off. The face beneath was older, harder, etched with lines of discipline and grief that had not been there a decade ago. His dark hair was cut short, in a severe, military style, but his eyes, behind the rectangular glasses he still wore, were the same, intense, intelligent, and utterly uncompromising. The face of their former class president. Ida, Izuku breathed, the name a knot of disbelief and horror in his throat. Tenya Ida, Warden General of the Ethelberg Commission Forces, met his gaze without a flicker of recognition for the friend he once was. His expression was a mask of stern duty. That is a name I no longer use. I am Warden General. And you are a terrorist, a relic threatening the peace I have worked so hard to build. Peace? Jiro spat, her own shock momentarily eclipsed by a surge of anger. You call this peace? Collars, suppression, living in constant fear? Is that what you call peace, Ida? Ida's gaze shifted to her, cold and dismissive. Control, Warden Jiro, he corrected her, though she had never been a warden. And order. The alternative is the chaos that killed my family, the chaos that burned this world and cost us everything. Anarchy is not freedom, it is a wildfire. I am simply the one who had the courage to put the fire out. By pouring concrete over the ashes? Izuku shot back, his voice rising. Green sparks of one for all began to dance around him, a storm gathering in response to his turmoil. You've built a prison and called it peace. This isn't what Tensei would have wanted. The mention of his brother's name was the first thing to cause a crack in Ida's iron facade. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Do not dare speak his name. You have no right, you, who cling to the very ideals of heroic individualism that fueled the fire. Order has a price. I paid it. I simply ensure everyone else does, too. He gestured with his hand, a swift, chopping motion. Contain them. The fight began instantly. The wardens opened fire, their pulse rifles unleashing bolts of concussive energy. Izuku moved, a blur of green lightning. He activated One for All, pushing it to a steady 30%. He was faster than the bolts, weaving between them. Black Whip erupted from his arms, not to attack, but to form a protective web around Jiro, deflecting the shots that came too close. The projectors! Jiro yelled over the din, her jacks plunging into the floor. They're on a network power source. I need to find the primary junction. Buy you time. Izuku grunted, pushing off the wall. He shot towards the nearest warden, but Ida was suddenly there, intercepting him. The engines on Ida's legs flared with brilliant blue light. He moved with a speed that was no longer just his quirk. It was a perfect synthesis of biology and machine. It was faster, more controlled, and brutally efficient. Recipro turbo, overdrive. Ida's voice was a cold command. He didn't try to kick Izuku. Instead, he moved in a precise, calculated pattern, his armored form a battering ram. He slammed into Izuku, not with overwhelming force, but with perfectly applied kinetic energy designed to disrupt his momentum. Izuku absorbed the blow, skidding back. He was shocked by the sheer tactical brilliance. Ida wasn't fighting like a brawler. He was fighting like a scalpel, analyzing and countering every move. Your reliance on Black Whip for mobility and defense is a flaw, Ida stated, his legs already repositioning him for another strike. It anchors you. Predictable. He charged again. Izuku fired a Delaware Smash Air Force blast, a compressed cannon of air designed to throw Ida off balance. But Ida's leg thrusters fired in precise bursts, allowing him to strafe to the side, the air cannon harmlessly blasting a chunk out of the wall behind him. He had predicted the move before Izuku had even finished it. How? How could he know his style so intimately? Jiro, now! Izuku yelled, launching himself upwards with float. He used the ceiling to pivot, lashing out with a whip of black energy towards another warden. But Ida was there again, his leg engines propelling him vertically. He caught the whip in his gauntlet hand. A powerful electric current surged from his armor, traveling up the length of Black Whip and shocking Izuku with thousands of volts. Izuku roared in pain, the green lightning around him flickering as his concentration broke. He fell, crashing onto the rubble-strewn floor. Your quirk is a torrent of unrefined power, Midoriya, Ida said, landing softly a few feet away, the picture of perfect control. I am the dam that will contain it. Freedom is the luxury of a world that isn't burning. This world is still smoldering. And you are a stray spark. He began to advance, his movements deliberate, final. The other wardens held their positions, their rifles trained, forming a perfect kill box. Found it! Jiro's voice screamed in his ear. 2 floors down. The old server room. But they are reinforcing the door. Izuku pushed himself up, his arm numb from the shock. Pain lanced through his ribs. Ida was right. He was being outthought, outmaneuvered. His raw power wasn't enough against this cold, calculated machine. He needed more. He drew a ragged breath, digging deeper into the sea of power within him. He felt the familiar presence of the vestiges, a silent council offering their strength. He let more of it flow, pushing past his self-imposed limits. The green energy around him intensified, crackling, the air growing heavy with its power. 45%. The pressure was immense, a physical strain that made his bones ache, but it was a familiar pain. You're honoring the memories of everyone we lost by becoming the very thing we fought against? Izuku growled, his voice a low, dangerous thing. They dreamed of a world where people could smile. Look at this world you've made, Ida. No one is smiling. Smiles fade. Order is eternal, Ida retorted unimpressed. He braced himself, his leg armor glowing brighter. You cannot win. I'm not trying to win, Izuku roared, Jean having stored the kinetic energy from Ida's blows and his own pained movements. He unleashed it all at once, combining it with 45% of One for All. I'm just trying to break the cage. Delaware Smash. He didn't aim at Ida. He aimed at the floor. The impact was cataclysmic. The entire corridor of UA High exploded downwards. Concrete and steel screamed as the floor disintegrated, blowing a massive hole through to the level below. Dust and debris filled the air, a choking cloud that blinded the warden's sensors. The containment field flickered and died as several of its projectors were destroyed in the blast. "Go!" Izuku yelled, grabbing Jiro with Black Whip and pulling her into the newly created chasm. They fell through the cloud of debris, landing heavily on the floor below. Alarms blared throughout the ruined campus. "My turn," Jiro said, a grim smile on her face. She slammed her jacks into the wall, closing her eyes. Heartbeat Ripper, Discord. She didn't create a sound wave. She created a counter-frequency, a high-intensity sonic pulse tuned specifically to the warden's comms and optical systems. Above them, the remaining wardens cried out, clutching their helmets. Their visors filled with static, their earpieces emitting a deafening shriek. It was the perfect diversion. "This way." Jiro pulled him down another corridor, her senses guiding them through the maze of the collapsing building. They could hear Ida's engines roaring above them, a sound of pure, controlled fury. He was already recovering. They didn't have much time. They burst out of a side entrance, back into the overgrown grounds, just as a section of the main building collapsed behind them, sealing the exit. They scrambled into the relative cover of the ruined gymnasium, gasping for breath. "We have to move," Izuku panted, his body screaming in protest from the strain of 45%. Kaminari's window is closing. As they ducked behind a slab of collapsed wall, Izuku risked a glance back. Through a crack, he could see Ida standing at the edge of the hole they'd created, his form silhouetted against the harsh white searchlights. He wasn't pursuing. He had his helmet back on and was speaking into his comms, his voice calm and professional once more, despite the chaos. Containment failed, Ida's voice crackled, faint but audible on the warden frequency Jiro was monitoring through her jacks. "Subject vestige is more powerful than anticipated." The trap was a partial success. "We confirmed his identity and current operational level." There was a pause. Ida was listening to someone on the other end. "Yes, sir," Ida continued. "The asset is secure. The transfer to the Spire will proceed as scheduled. He will be ready for the final phase of the project." Izuku's blood ran cold. Asset? The Spire? What were they talking about? Then, Ida said something that made the world stop. "My analysis of his combat style was correct. His integration of Black Whip and FA gene follows the patterns outlined in the dossier precisely. He remains predictable." Izuku froze. The pain in his body was forgotten, replaced by a chilling, sickening realization that spread through him like ice. The dossier. His use of FA gene in combination with Black Whip was a recent development, a style he perfected in the last 2 years, fighting in the shadows. Very few people had ever seen it. His core team, Achiko, Kaminari, Jiro. No one else. The wardens he fought never survived with their memory data intact. Ida hadn't just been a good tactician. He hadn't just been analyzing him in the moment. He had come into this fight with prior knowledge. He knew Izuku's new moves, his specific combos, his tells. He knew his exact fighting patterns. The leak wasn't just a simple information breach. It wasn't just patrol routes or safe house locations. The traitor was feeding the Commission detailed, up-to-date intelligence on his combat abilities. The traitor was someone who knew him. Someone who knew him intimately. Someone in their tiny, trusted circle. He looked over at Jiro, who was focused on finding them an escape route. He thought of Kaminari, their lifeline in the digital world. He thought of Achiko, his second-in-command, the person he trusted more than anyone. One of them had given Ida the key to defeating him. A new kind of pain, sharper and deeper than any physical blow, twisted in his gut. They had escaped the trap at UA High, but as they melted back into the shadows of the dead zone, Izuku realized they had stumbled into another, far more terrifying one. A trap made of betrayal. The descent back into the hearth was a journey into a colder, deeper silence than the one they had left behind in the ruins of UA High. Izuku and Jiro moved with the grim efficiency of soldiers returning from a failed mission, the adrenaline of the fight leaching away to leave a residue of exhaustion and a bitter, metallic taste of dread. When the maintenance hatch hissed open, Kaminari and Achiko were waiting for them at the bottom of the stairs. The relief on their faces was immediate and palpable, a flash of light in the gloom. "You're back!" Kaminari exclaimed, his usual nervous energy amplified. The ghost signal worked, but they figured it out faster than I expected. Another 5 minutes and their hunter-killer programs would have triangulated my position. "What happened? Did you find who sent the signal?" Achiko's eyes were fixed on Izuku, her gaze sharp and analytical, cataloging his torn gear, the fresh burns on his suit, and the way he held his left arm stiffly at his side. Her relief was instantly tempered by concern. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," Izuku grunted, pushing past them towards the command center. The words were automatic, a reflex honed over years of hiding his pain. But this time, the pain wasn't just physical. Jiro answered Kaminari's question, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It was a trap. The whole thing. They were waiting for us." She leaned heavily against the support pillar, the sonic feedback from her own attack having left her drained and disoriented. "It was Ida." The name dropped into the cavern like a stone into a still pool. Kaminari's jaw went slack. "Ida? Tenya Ida?" No. No, he was listed as Kia during the purge. His whole family. The report was a lie, Izuku said, his voice a low growl. He slammed his uninjured hand down on the holodable, the impact echoing in the tense silence. "He's the Warden General. He's in charge of all commissioned forces in Ethelberg." Achiko stared, her mind visibly struggling to process the revelation. Ida, the very model of heroic integrity, the boy who had followed rules to a fault, was now the iron-fisted enforcer of their oppression. It was a betrayal of a memory, a twisting of everything they had once fought for. "That's not possible," she whispered, shaking her head. "I saw him," Izuku said, his voice raw. "I fought him. He's faster, stronger. His armor is state-of-the-art. But that's not the worst part." He finally looked up, his green eyes blazing with a cold fire that made them all flinch. "He knew how I fight. He knew about my new techniques, my combinations. He countered moves I've only ever used in the field in the last 2 years. The unspoken accusation hung thick and heavy in the air, a poisonous gas that filled the space between them. 4 people, the last remnants of a dream, bound by a decade of shared struggle. And now, one of them was a traitor. Kaminari's face went pale. He looked from Izuku to Achiko to Jiro, his eyes wide with a frantic, horrified denial. "Wait, boss, you don't mean, you can't think. The leak is real," Izuku stated, his gaze hard as flint. "And it's not just patrol schedules. They're feeding Ida tactical analysis. They're giving him everything he needs to dismantle us. To dismantle me." He didn't look at anyone in particular, but his gaze swept over all of them, the weight of his suspicion a physical force. The trust that had been the bedrock of their existence, the unspoken faith that had allowed them to survive this long, was fracturing before their eyes. The hearth, their sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage with a snake coiled in the corner. Achiko's expression hardened, a mask of resolve sliding over her shock. "No," she said, her voice firm. "I don't believe it. Not one of us. The facts don't care what you believe, Achiko." Izuku shot back, his frustration and pain boiling over. "Someone in this room gave him that intel. There's no other explanation." "Then we'll find another explanation," she insisted, stepping forward, her hands clenched into fists. "We've been through too much to let paranoia tear us apart now. We'll vet the data, we'll sweep the comms for bugs, we'll go through everything." "It's not a bug, it's a person." Their argument was cut short by a series of sharp, frantic beeps from Kaminari's console. Guys?" he said, his voice trembling slightly. "You need to see this." He sounded spooked, which was enough to shatter the tension. Kaminari lived and breathed data. It took a lot to rattle him. They all turned to his workstation. He was staring at a screen filled with cascading lines of Warden encryption, the code he'd been trying to crack. "While you were gone," he explained, his fingers flying across the keyboard, "I was sifting through the data fragments from the UA ambush. Our comms picked up a lot of chatter before Jiro fried their systems. Most of it is just noise, standard tactical callouts. But this," he isolated a single packet of data. It was tiny, almost infinitesimally small, hidden within a routine diagnostic burst sent between Ida's suit and the Warden command network. It was a ghost in the machine, a whisper buried in a scream. "It's a piggyback signal," Kaminari breathed, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Heavily encrypted. Military grade, but not commission standard. It's a completely different architecture. It's like someone built a secret message inside a bullet and fired it during the gunfight. "Can you decrypt it?" Izuku asked, his anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by a cold, sharp curiosity. "No way," Kaminari said, shaking his head. "This is light years beyond me. Trying to brute force this would take a century. But I don't have to." He pointed to a single subroutine within the encryption. "The key isn't a password. It's a biometric signature. It's coded to unlock for a specific person's brainwave pattern." "Whose?" Achiko asked. Kaminari swallowed hard. He ran a diagnostic comparison, cross-referencing the required signature with the biometric data he had on file for all of them, data used to access their own secure systems. A match flashed on screen in bright, undeniable green. He looked at Izuku. "Yours." Izuku stared at the screen, a fresh wave of confusion and suspicion washing over him. A secret message sent during the ambush, keyed specifically to him? It made no sense. "Open it," he said, his voice a low command. "Are you sure?" Kaminari asked nervously. "This could be anything. A logic bomb, a virus. Open it." Izuku placed his hand on a biometric scanner linked to the console. Kaminari took a deep breath and executed the command. The encryption unlocked. The data packet unfurled, revealing its contents. It wasn't a virus. It was a single, tightly packed intel file. Achiko projected the file onto the main holodable. A schematic appeared in the air between them, a detailed, multi-level blueprint of a place Izuku recognized with a sickening lurch. It was the spire, the gleaming needle of a skyscraper that served as the Commission's central headquarters, the seat of their power in Ethelberg. Specific sections of the blueprint were highlighted. A wing on the 80th floor, labeled Aegis Wing. Below the schematic, a list of names scrolled by. Dozens of them. Some he didn't recognize, but others hit him like a physical blow. Mirio Togata, Tamaki Amajiki, Nijiro Hado, Eijiro Kurishima. Names of the lost. Heroes and friends he believed were dead, captured in the purge and never seen again. According to this file, they were alive. They were prisoners. "The Aegis Wing," Achiko read aloud from the file's text, her voice a horrified whisper. "A black site prison within the spire. For high-value quirk users. They're not just imprisoned, they're being used as living batteries." "That's what Ida meant," Izuku said, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. He mentioned an asset being transferred to the spire. He scanned the list, his eyes searching for a specific name. And then he found it. Near the bottom, marked with a flag of high priority. "Shoto Todoroki." "He's there," Izuku breathed. "Shoto's alive. And he's in there." The file contained more than just names. It had guard rotations, sensory grid layouts, power conduit schematics. It was a comprehensive infiltration plan. It was everything they would need to break into the most secure facility in the city. It was a perfect trap. Or a miracle. At the very bottom of the file, there was a single line of text, separate from the rest. No signature, no explanation. Just 6 cryptic words. "The sun sets on the frozen peak." The phrase meant nothing to the others. To them, it was just more suspicious, coded nonsense. But for Izuku, it was a lightning bolt that struck the core of his being. It unlocked a memory he hadn't revisited in over a decade, a fragment of a better time, a world before the fall. He was 16. They were in the middle of a winter training exercise at Ue, a survival simulation in the mountains led by Aizawa. It was brutal. They were cold, hungry, and exhausted. He, Todoroki, and Bakugo had been assigned to the same team, a volatile combination that Aizawa had likely engineered for his own cynical amusement. They were huddled around a pathetic excuse for a fire on a high ridge, the sun bleeding orange and purple across the snow-covered peaks behind them. They were arguing, as usual. Bakugo was angry that Todoroki's ice was more efficient for creating shelter, while Todoroki was stoically ignoring Bakugo's tirade. Izuku, ever the mediator, had tried to find some common ground. Look at that, he had said, pointing at the sunset. Even after all this, it's beautiful, Bakugo had grunted. It's just the sun going down, nerd. Who gives a crap? But Todoroki had turned, his heterochromatic eyes watching the last sliver of sun disappear behind the highest, most frozen peak. He was quiet for a long moment. My father, he always talked about reaching the pinnacle. Becoming the number one. But he never stopped to look at the view. He looked at the mountain. The sun sets on the frozen peak, he'd said, more to himself than to them. Even the brightest fire has to rest. It had been a rare, unguarded moment of introspection from Todoroki. A quiet acknowledgement of the endless, burning pressure he lived under. It was a moment only the three of them had shared, a piece of conversational driftwood in the sea of their tumultuous teenage years. Izuku's head snapped up from the holotable, his eyes wide with a dawning, impossible realization. It's Shoto, he said, his voice hoarse. This message, it's from him. Achiko stared at him. Izuku, what are you talking about? That's just a random phrase. No, it's not, he insisted, a frantic energy seizing him. It's a code. Something he said once, a long time ago. Only a few people would know what it means. He looked at her, at Kaminari, at Jiro. He's telling us he's alive. He's telling us he's the one who sent this. Jiro was the first to voice the obvious flaw. How? How could a prisoner in a black site get access to this level of intel and a military-grade encryption suite to send it? I don't know, Izuku admitted. Maybe he has help. Maybe someone on the inside. He trailed off, his own words sparking a new thought. The leak. What if it wasn't one of them? What if the intel Ida had was coming from an entirely different source? Achiko stepped forward, her expression a mixture of deep concern and skepticism. Izuku, listen to yourself. 10 minutes ago, you were convinced one of us was a traitor. Now you're ready to bet our lives on a cryptic message and a memory from when you were a teenager? Ida just used our past against us. This is the same thing, but bigger. It's a better lure. They dangled a ghost from Class 1A, and you ran right into a cage. Now they're dangling Shoto, Kirishima, Mirio, all of them. They're dangling your biggest failures in front of you, knowing you won't be able to resist. Everything she said was perfectly logical. It was the smart, rational take. But it didn't feel right. The phrase, the sun sets on the frozen peak, was too specific, too personal. It wasn't a line from a history book. It was a shared memory. It was a whisper of truth in a city of lies. I know how it sounds, Izuku said, his voice steadying, his conviction solidifying. But my gut, and the vestiges, they're all telling me this is real. This is our chance. Not just to save them, but to strike a real blow against the Commission. And if you're wrong? Achiko challenged, her voice quiet but sharp. If you walk into the spire and it's another trap? We don't have the numbers to survive another loss like that. The embers will be finished. I'll be finished. The weight of that responsibility settled on him. He wasn't just risking himself. He was risking their entire movement. He was risking her. He looked at the holodable, at the names of his captured friends. He saw Kirishima's defiant grin, Mirio's blinding smile, Shoto's quiet strength. He remembered the promise he had made to himself in the ruins of Ue, a promise forged in the fires of his greatest failure. I'm not leaving anyone behind again. This was the ultimate test of that vow. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and made the decision. It was a choice that went against all logic, against the counsel of his most trusted friend. It was a leap of faith into a dark and dangerous unknown. He opened his eyes and met Achiko's worried gaze. We can't live in fear of the traps, he said, his voice imbued with a calm certainty that surprised even himself. If we do, we've already lost. This signal, this message, it came from someone who risked everything to get it to us. I'm going to trust that person. He looked around the room, at the faces of his small, broken family of rebels, the last embers of a dying fire. We have a new mission, he announced, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that had been absent for too long. We're going to the spire. We're getting our friends back. He turned to the holodable, his mind already shifting from doubt to strategy. He looked at the blueprint of the Aegis wing, at the list of names. He was no longer just a ghost hiding in the shadows. He was a hero with a mission, and as he began to formulate a plan, he gave a name to the unknown, unseen ally who had given them this chance. The mysterious sender who had buried a message for him in the heart of the enemy's network. Ground Zero, he murmured to himself. He didn't know who they were, or why they were helping him. But as he looked at the impossible path ahead, he knew one thing for sure: he had to trust them. He had to trust the whisper from the heart of the machine. It was the only hope they had left. The spire was the unblinking eye of Ethelberg. A shard of obsidian and cobalt light that pierced the perpetual gray sky. It was a monument to the Commission's absolute authority. It was more than a building. It was a symbol, a declaration in steel and circuits that order had triumphed. From its broadcast antenna, propaganda flowed. From its server farms, surveillance data was processed. And within its aegis wing, hope was imprisoned. To assault the spire was not just a tactical impossibility. It was a suicidal act of blasphemy against the New World Order. And it was exactly what they were about to do. The 3 days leading up to the infiltration were a blur of frantic, high-stakes preparation. The hearth, once tense with suspicion, was now electric with a desperate, focused energy. The mission, reckless as it was, had given them a purpose beyond mere survival. It was a chance to fight back, to reclaim something that had been stolen from them. Izuku pushed his body to its limits, his training regimen a punishing cycle of controlled power bursts and tactical simulations. He had to be faster, stronger, smarter. He practiced modulating one for all from 5% to 45% in a split second, the green lightning crackling around him in controlled, precise flashes. The vestiges were a low hum in his mind, their collective experience a wellspring of instinct and strategy. He was honing himself into a living lockpick, a weapon designed to slip through the cracks of an impregnable fortress. Achiko, having accepted his decision, became the mission's architect. She spent hours poring over the blueprints from Ground Zero, cross-referencing them with a decade's worth of scavenged city schematics. She planned their route down to the centimeter, her mind a whirlwind of contingencies and fail-safes. The weight of the operation rested on her shoulders, and her natural buoyancy was compressed into a diamond-hard resolve. Kaminari and Jiro became the architects of chaos. They worked in tandem, a symphony of digital and acoustic warfare. Kaminari built the phantom bomb he had promised, not just a single false signal, but a cascade of coordinated digital ghosts. He programmed dozens of false quark energy readings, emergency service calls, and infrastructure malfunctions, all timed to trigger sequentially across the city. A tidal wave of misinformation designed to overwhelm the Commission's central command and pull the Warden patrols in 1,000 different directions. Jiro, meanwhile, listened. She spent days with her earphone jacks plugged into the city's core infrastructure, mapping the seismic and acoustic rhythms of the spire itself. She learned the hum of its ventilation systems, the vibrational signature of its elevator shafts, the precise frequency of its internal security comms. She was creating a symphony of silence, a path through the noise where they could move unheard. The plan they devised was audacious, a 3-phase insertion that relied on split-second timing and a healthy dose of impossible luck. It was a storm of their own making, and they were about to unleash it on the heart of the city. Phase 1: The Surge. The operation began in the grimy depths of an electrical substation 2 clicks south of the spire. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, and the low, oppressive hum of 1,000,000 volts of energy vibrated through the soles of their boots. Kaminari was in his element, a manic conductor orchestrating an electrical apocalypse. He had a custom-built interface jacked directly into the main power conduit, his face illuminated by the cascade of data on his portable terminal. "Okay, people, sound off," Achiko's voice, calm and steady, came through their comms. She was stationed in a derelict clock tower 1,000 meters away, their eye in the sky, monitoring Warden movements through a powerful long-range optical scope. "Jiro, what's the beat?" "Rhythm is steady," Jiro's voice replied. She was perched on a nearby rooftop, her jacks subtly plugged into a communications line, listening to the city's digital heartbeat. Internal security comms are running standard checks. No signs of heightened alert. "Izuku, you're at the insertion point?" Achiko asked. "In position," Izuku confirmed. He was crouched in the shadows of an alleyway across from the spire's massive, imposing base. The building rose before him like a sheer cliff face, its polished black surface reflecting the city's grim lights. He could see the service entrance for the lower-level waste disposal and recycling unit, their way in. It was protected by a laser grid, pressure plates, and 2 automated sentry turrets. "All right, Denki," Achiko commanded. "Give us our blackout." "On my mark." Kaminari grinned, a spark of his old, showman personality flashing in his eyes. "Time to blow a fuse. A really, really big fuse." "Mark." Kaminari's fingers flew across his keyboard. He rerouted a massive surge of power from the city's industrial grid directly into the substation's primary transformer. For a moment, the hum around him rose to a deafening shriek. The lights in his terminal flickered wildly. "It's gonna blow!" he yelled, yanking his interface and diving behind a concrete pillar. The transformer exploded in a spectacular shower of blue and white sparks. A wave of concussive force shook the entire sector. Across a 10-block radius, lights flickered and died. The steady glow of the cityscape was momentarily pockmarked with darkness. "Surge is a success," Kaminari reported, his voice giddy with adrenaline. "Power in Sector Gamma 7 is unstable. They'll be scrambling for at least 5 minutes. The spire's lower-level security just went dark," Jiro confirmed. "Laser grid is down. Turrets are offline. Izuku, you have a 60-second window before their backup generators kick in." "Go, go, go!" Izuku moved. He burst from the alleyway, a green-tinged shadow against the dark street. Fa Jean released the kinetic energy he'd been storing, propelling him across the 50-meter plaza in less than 3 seconds. He reached the service door, tore the panel off its magnetic locks, and slipped inside, the heavy door hissing shut behind him just as the emergency lights flickered on inside the corridor. He was in Phase 2, the silent diversion. The inside of the spire was sterile, cold, and unnervingly quiet. White walls, polished gray floors, and the omnipresent blue glow of commission logos. Izuku moved through the maintenance corridors, a ghost in the machine. Jiro's voice was a whisper in his ear, guiding him. "Left at the next junction. Avoid the red-lined floor panels. Those are secondary pressure sensors. There's a warden patrol heading your way, 2 floors above. You have 90 seconds until they pass." While Izuku made his ascent through the building's skeletal framework, Achiko began her part of the plan. She had infiltrated the building hours earlier, disguised in a stolen, low-level technician's uniform, her face partially obscured by a breathing mask. Her quirk, which required her to touch an object to make it weightless, was useless for direct combat but perfect for subtle infiltration. Her target was a cargo transport hub on the 40th floor, halfway to the Aegis wing. It was a bustling nexus of activity, with cargo drones and uniformed commission employees moving supplies throughout the building. This was the riskiest part of the plan. A single misstep, a single suspicious glance, and it was all over. She moved with a quiet purpose, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She located her target, a series of large, automated cargo containers scheduled for transport to the upper levels, near the Aegis wing. Her objective was to create a diversion that was loud and disruptive enough to draw guards away from the prison block, but that looked like a simple, catastrophic accident rather than an attack. She casually tripped near the container's control panel, her hand brushing against its surface. The 5-ton container suddenly became weightless. It lifted a few inches off its magnetic track with a soft groan. She repeated the process on 2 more containers as she recovered her balance and moved on, a phantom of chaos. "Containers primed," she whispered into her hidden calm. "Jiro, give me the signal." "Elevator shaft C4 is clear," Jiro's voice came back. "Do it." Achiko found a quiet corner and pressed a small detonator. It wasn't an explosive. It was a simple, high-frequency device that overloaded the magnetic clamps holding the containers in place. With a series of loud, metallic shrieks, the 3 weightless containers were released. They floated upwards, untethered, and began to drift erratically through the massive hangar. One slammed into a series of stacked supply crates, sending them scattering across the floor. Another drifted directly into the path of a large transport drone, causing a spectacular, screeching collision. The third, guided by a gentle push of air from a nearby vent, floated directly towards the main cargo elevator shaft. Chaos erupted. Alarms blared. Employees scrambled for cover. Containment breach in Cargo Bay 40C. A voice yelled over the internal comms. All available security units, respond immediately. Achiko watched from the shadows as two squads of wardens, stationed on the floors between her and the Aegis wing, were diverted, their boots clattering as they raced towards the accident she had engineered. She had just created a gaping hole in the spire's defenses. Diversion successful, she reported, a thin smile touching her lips. The path is clear, Izuku. It's all on you now. Phase 3, the ghost's ascent. I see it, Izuku breathed. He was clinging to the outside of a ventilation shaft, looking down a long, white corridor. At the end of it was a single, heavily reinforced door made of a dark, non-reflective metal. There were no markings, but he knew what it was. The entrance to the Aegis wing. Achiko's diversion had pulled away the main guard detail, but the corridor itself was a death trap. Ground Zero's blueprints had been invaluable. Izuku's visor, synced with the data, highlighted the threats in a shimmering red overlay. A laser grid crisscrossed the hallway in a complex, shifting pattern. The floor was a mosaic of pressure plates, each one capable of triggering alarms or deploying automated turrets hidden in the walls. Overhead, sonic sensors were calibrated to detect any sound above a whisper. This was a test of everything he had become. Not a brawler, not a symbol. A whisper. A ghost. He took a deep breath and began. He activated float, his body becoming weightless. He pushed off the wall gently, propelling himself into the corridor, hovering a meter above the pressure-sensitive floor. The first part of the trap was bypassed. Now the lasers. They moved in a hypnotic, deadly dance. There was a pattern, a rhythm, but it was too fast for a normal person to navigate. But Izuku had danger sense. It wasn't just a warning system, it was a form of precognition. The lasers appeared as sharp, painful spikes in his mind moments before they fired, allowing him to anticipate their path. He moved through the grid like a phantom. He twisted his body, contorting in midair, a silent acrobat in a web of lethal light. Black Whip lashed out, not as a weapon, but as a series of delicate, silent anchors. A thin, black tendril would shoot out, sticking to a section of the ceiling for a fraction of a second, allowing him to alter his trajectory, to pull himself left or right with a minute, silent tug. It was an intricate, deadly ballet performed in total silence. He was halfway down the corridor when a new threat emerged. The sonic sensors. He could see them now, small, circular discs on the ceiling. Even the faint thwip of his black whip tendrils could set them off. He couldn't use his whips. He had to rely on float and his own momentum. He had one last push. He used FA gene, releasing a tiny, controlled burst of kinetic energy from his fingertips, just enough to propel him forward. He was a projectile, gliding through the final 10 meters of the laser grid. His danger sense screamed. A new laser, an unscheduled one, fired from a hidden emitter near the door. It was an unpredictable element, a random variable designed to catch anyone who had perfectly memorized the pattern. It was going to hit him. There was no time to dodge. He didn't dodge. He activated smokescreen. A thick, black cloud erupted from his back, completely silent. It wasn't smoke in the traditional sense. It was composed of fine, light-absorbing particulates. The laser beam hit the cloud and dispersed, its energy scattered harmlessly. Izuku shot out of the dissipating smoke, his boots landing silently on the small, safe patch of floor directly in front of the Aegis wing door. He had made it. He placed a hand on the door. It was cold, and he could feel a faint, thrumming energy from within. He attached a small, high-tech device Kaminari had built, a kinetic resonance cracker. It began to emit a series of tuned vibrations, designed to find the lock's resonant frequency and shatter it from the inside out. It would take 30 seconds. A lifetime. The corridor behind him was still. The alarms were silent. 20 seconds. His heart hammered in his chest. This was it. The culmination of all their planning, all their risk. 10 seconds. A soft chime echoed in his ear. The lock disengaged. The heavy door slid open with a barely audible hiss. He stepped inside. The interior of the Aegis wing was a nightmare of cold, clinical horror. It was a circular chamber, lined with dozens of transparent cryostasis pods. Inside each pod, floating in a pale, luminescent fluid, was a person. Wires and tubes snaked from their bodies, connecting to a massive energy conduit that ran through the center of the room. He saw Kurashima, his body relaxed, his usual sharp grin absent. He saw Nijiro Hato, her vibrant energy stolen, her face a pale mask. They were sleeping, trapped in a living death, their powerful quirks being siphoned away to fuel God knows what. Izuku's blood ran cold with a righteous fury. He moved quickly, his eyes scanning the pods for the one he had come for. He found it at the far end of the chamber. The pod was different, reinforced, and the fluid inside had a bluish, frosty tint. Inside, his face peaceful, his iconic scar a pale slash against his skin, was Shoto Todoroki. His body temperature was being kept artificially low, a direct countermeasure to nullify his powerful quirk. Izuku moved to the control panel, his fingers flying. Ground Zero's intel had included the release codes. He keyed them in. A red light flashed on the panel. Access denied? Warden General override in effect. No, Izuku whispered. A slow, rhythmic clapping echoed from the entrance of the chamber. Izuku spun around, his body instantly coiling into a combat stance. Leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest, was Warden General Tenya Ida. He was not in his full armor, but a simpler, black commission uniform. His expression was not angry or triumphant. It was one of cold, academic disappointment. Impressive, Midoriya, Ida said, his voice calm and level. Truly. Your infiltration was flawless. The power surge, the cargo bay diversion, very well executed. You even navigated the Omega Corridor. No one has ever done that. Ida, Izuku growled. How? Did you really think we wouldn't notice a massive, citywide power surge originating from a single substation? Or that a triple containment failure in a high-security cargo bay was an accident? Ida pushed off the doorframe and took a slow step into the room. I wasn't fooled by your diversion. I created it. Izuku stared, his mind reeling. What are you talking about? The intel, Ida said, a cruel hint of a smile on his lips. The whisper from your Ground Zero. It was a calculated leak. I fed that data into the network myself, knowing your tech expert would find it. I knew that the mention of your captured friends, of Todoroki, would be a lure you couldn't resist. He gestured to the chamber around them. Welcome to the real trap, Midoriya. Not a cage of lasers, a cage of sentiment. The blood drained from Izuku's face. It had all been a lie. Ground Zero wasn't an ally. They were Ida. He had been played from the very beginning. The spire wasn't the target, Ida continued, his voice echoing in the cold, sterile room. You were. The door behind Ida slid shut with a heavy, final thud. Red emergency lights began to flash, bathing the chamber in a hellish crimson glow. Panels in the walls slid open, and a dozen automated sentry turrets deployed, all aiming directly at Izuku. He was trapped. Utterly, completely trapped. It's over, Ida said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Surrender, and I will make your processing painless. Izuku looked at the turrets. He looked at the sealed door. He looked at Shoto, floating in his icy prison. He had failed. He had led them all into a trap, blinded by his own desperate hope. And then, something impossible happened. The entire chamber shuddered violently. The red emergency lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness for a second before the standard white lights stuttered back on. The sentry turrets began to twitch and spark, their targeting lasers going haywire, firing randomly into the ceiling. A new voice, distorted and digitized, crackled to life over Ida's personal comm unit, loud enough for Izuku to hear in the sudden chaos. Override engaged. Security protocols for Aegis Wing, Sublevel Epsilon, are now under my control. Ida's head snapped up, his composure finally breaking. He tapped his earpiece, his eyes wide with disbelief. Central Command report. Who is on this channel? Identify yourself. The control panel on Shoto's pod suddenly flashed green. Override successful. Releasing asset. With a loud hiss of escaping gas, the cryofluid began to drain from Shoto's pod. Ida stared at the pod, then back at the chaos of his malfunctioning security systems. The cold, calculated control was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated fury. "Who are you?" he roared into his calm. The distorted voice crackled back, dripping with a familiar, arrogant confidence that Izuku hadn't heard in 10 long years. "Took you long enough, Deku,"